Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Net Zero Living Lunch and Learn webinar about forging collaborative partnerships and leveraging data to accelerate the transition to net zero. Delighted that you've chosen to spend your lunch times with us today. Please do say hello in the chat if you can. Tell us who you are, where you are, perhaps what the weather is like where you are. I am surrounded by snow. Has it reached you as well? Do let us know in the chat. Thank you. So yeah, as I say, this program, this webinar is the second out of a series of four. We'll share details at the end, a bit more about how you can find out more about the Innovate UK Net Zero Living program. I've also just posted a link in the chat if you want to find out some more. But this is just to introduce myself. I wear several hats, and I'm the moderator for today's session. And everything that I'm involved with is somehow at the interface of climate, cities and places, and data. So today's webinar is extremely relevant for all of my interests, and I'm delighted to be able to moderate today's session. The three organisations behind the Innovate UK, or three of the many organisations behind the Innovate UK Net Zero Living programme, are listed here on the screen, helping to convene currently a network of 59 towns and cities over the last couple of years, and you're going to hear from three of them today. Funded by Innovate UK, also convened and organised by Urban Foresight, and the community of practice is led by an organisation called Liminal. Thank you all for saying hello. James in snowy Stroud, Viv, good to see you all. Mark, you've missed us. We've missed you too, Mark. Thank you. Hi, Adele. Great to see you from Galway. Mild winter day where you are. Wonderful. And Viv from Perth and Kinross. That's great to see you as well. Thanks for joining. So tiny bit of housekeeping. So you're all kind of muted by default as part of this kind of webinar, but we really want to hear from you. So please do chat away in the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on things that you're saying and sharing there. There is a Q&A functionality as well in Zoom. So if you do have specific questions for our speakers, do post them there and we will get through as many of those as we can before we finish at 1 o'clock UK time today. You're already introducing yourselves, which is great. Hi, Shona from sunny and defrosting Dundee. Hi, Marianne. Great to see you. Call you Maz. Okay, I'll try and remember that. And yeah, post your questions in the Q&A. And we are recording today's session. So you don't need to make any notes, what have you. You'll get access to the video and the slides, etc. after today's call. And yeah, our agenda is super simple. In just a moment, I'm going to hand over to the first of our three speakers, Michael Suddens from Leicestershire, telling us about a project called Greener Future. Then we're going to hear from Hugo Chandler about realising net zero Liverpool. And then last but not least, Robbie Barr talking about the retrofit one-stop shop in York. They're each going to have sort of up to 14 minutes each is the precise timing. We do want you to ask your questions throughout, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can in today's session. If not, we will definitely follow up in writing. So do say hello, do ask your questions. Hi, Kate from chilly and sunny Edinburgh. Apologies to anyone I haven't called out. Jackie from sunny Torquay. And so many of you are introducing yourselves. I can't keep track of it all. So thank you for joining us today. So I think that's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Michael from Leicestershire to talk about greener futures. If you want to turn your camera on, Michael, I will hand over to you to take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Roland. Yeah, thank you for the invite to come and present today. My name is Michael Siddons. I am the Greener Future Leicestershire project manager. And if you move on to the next slide, Roland, then so the Greener Future Leicestershire project was formerly known as Leicestershire Collaborate to Accelerate Net Zero. We're a £2.5 million demonstrator funded by Innovate UK, and we're one of the 7 demonstrator projects. So really our purpose is here to try and test new innovations and methods of delivery, and then share that learning with other UK local authorities. So Leicestershire has tried to look at the whole systems approach when it comes to delivery of a sustainable energy future. This means we've looked at everything from how do we prepare for what needs to be done? How do we ensure that our plans and evidence base are done so they are more effective and ready for delivery? And then moving into delivery, how do we ensure that we're actually delivering projects on the ground at the speed of which we need to deliver? The project has been delivered by a consortium of partners, and they're alongside the bottom of the screen. This includes the University's Partnership for Leicestershire, Energy Systems Catapult, National Grid, our local community energy group, Green Fox, and also Community Energy Pathways. And the project itself has been split across four main work packages. Today, I'm going to be focused on local energy planning, as the main element of this webinar that I'm focusing on is the leveraging data angle. But we have also got work packages that are looking at the governance and collaboration elements. So how do we ensure that all of us, in terms of stakeholders and partners in Leicestershire, are working together to accelerate delivery? We've also been building up the community energy sector, so going from one community energy organisation through to I think there's now seven groups in operation. And we've also been developing an advisory service that brings all of the demonstrator outputs together into the Greener Future brand, but also providing advice to businesses across Leicestershire to bring them along the journey as well. So if we can move on to the next slide, focusing then on the local area energy planning angle. For those of you that maybe aren't familiar with energy planning, for us, we've gone through the full seven-step process that tries to look at how do we create an evidence base that is fit for decision making and ensuring that we're creating a sustainable energy future for Leicestershire. So it looks at the whole energy system and tries to identify a cost-effective approach to meeting the UK government's net zero target. And on the next slide, what I'm going to talk through over this presentation is really these six different areas. So firstly, focusing on the top three. The local area energy planning stage for us is about creating an evidence base to help inform decision making. Now, decision making could include strategic planning, local plans across all of our districts and boroughs, climate action plans, but also we wanted to go beyond this to ensure that stakeholders have access to the data that comes out of the energy plans, that we're able to work with investors, network operators, and also the community energy sector. So as a collective, we're able to deliver the projects that come out and are suggested by the local energy plans. So this means we've been taking an innovative delivery approach to, in particular around the technical modelling. And this is helping us to identify what we term low regret options of delivery. And these are what the data is telling us, what the evidence is telling us are the best solutions and technologies for local areas. So the next slide, I'll be diving a little bit deeper into this, looking at the modeling approach. So again, trying to focus on the leveraging data angle. So local energy plans historically focus on 3, 4, or 5 different scenarios that are very much led by stakeholders or the consultant. What we wanted to try and do is trying to look at how could we do this differently, and how could we ensure that the data that we produce and the outputs that we produce for Leicestershire create a really solid evidence base that decisions could then be made of. So instead of following the historic approach for local energy plans, we've undertaken 2,500 different scenarios per local authority area, of which there's 8 across Leicester and Leicestershire. And these different scenarios represent different characteristic solutions and technologies that then measure the progress towards net zero in terms of carbon reduction and the cost above business as usual. Next slide, please. So each dot within this within the graph on the right represents one of these scenarios. And what this tries to do is then allows us to look at the effective scenarios, so those that get us the furthest along on the carbon reduction journey at the lowest annual cost above business as usual. And the purpose for doing this is we're trying to reduce biases associated with technologies and different solutions, but also local stakeholders, so that we're very much focused on a data-driven evidence base that then we can take forward into producing outputs that we then include within the local area energy plan. So it's very much statistic driven, and I'll get into a little bit more about exactly what that means in a moment. But on the next slide, just try and explain a bit around these different scenarios. So as I said, the scenario represents a different set of characteristics, interventions and solutions across the local area, and each is measured in terms of carbon reduction, but also its annual cost. So for example, a scenario could be a high use of domestic air source heat pumps. It could be maximizing heat network delivery across a local area, or maximizing the levels of domestic retrofit. And the purpose of doing this is we're trying to acknowledge that there is uncertainty around the future energy system, and we want to ensure that our decision making takes this into account. And by looking at different scenarios across the whole energy system and across different local areas, we're trying to identify the actions we can take, particularly over the short term, so within the next 5 years, that we term low regret. So this means that multiple of the effective scenarios agree that a specific technology or solution should be delivered in a certain area. And this can go down to building level data, street level data, and all the way up to lower super output areas. So to try and explain a bit further into what this means in terms of outputs, if we go on to the next slide, I'll then focus on the other three areas of this particular work package. So we have produced overarching local energy plan documentation for all of our local authority areas, and we've also produced one that covers the whole of Leicester and Leicestershire. Each of these documents provides a sustainable energy pathway and also looks at the energy transition requirements across all the different technologies and solutions, as well as provide focus zones and candidate projects that decision makers and stakeholders could potentially start exploring in terms of their more detailed feasibility. But for me, the one key area that we've tried to innovate and test new methods of delivery is around the actual outputs being publicly available to anyone who wants to access them in a user-friendly and engaging way that could help local energy plans go further in terms of being useful for actually looking at the future in terms of delivery of projects. So we've produced Leap Lens, and this is a digital tool that's publicly available through Greener Future Leicestershire on its website. And this provides access to granular level energy planning data for anyone. Now, on the next slide, I have screenshotted what this tool looks like, and I've got a couple more slides to go through it. But I will acknowledge it's very hard to show a digital engaging tool on a couple of slides. So I really do encourage you all after this webinar to have a look at Greener Future Leicestershire and navigate through to our local energy planning sections and play around with the tool yourself so you can see exactly what we've been working on within Leicestershire. But this slide shows that there is the homepage really of Leap Lens, and we've created it for different user profiles. So the one on screen currently is for local government, but we've also done the same for community energy, investors, and network operators, or you can be a generic user that has access to all of the outputs that come out of the local energy plans. So for the local government angle, it looks at presetting a user profile or interface that enables users to quickly access data, but they can also dive deeper into the data if they so wish. So on screen, we've got the focus zones and the candidate projects that are identified within the LEAP documents. The imagery in the LEAP documents is all the same as the imagery in LEAP Lens, and it can directly link to each other. So you're able to find data within the digital tool that is then within each of the LEAP documents as well. And for the local government user, It's preset with technologies such as your large-scale renewables, rooftop solar, heat networks, for example, alongside other different technologies. To try and show a little bit more about what happens when a user clicks through to one of these, if we go on to the next slide, this is the domestic retrofit, I guess, technology window. And this showcases, once you're zoomed out, it provides lower super output data for the total number of low regret retrofit measures that are required in each of the areas identified. And as you zoom in, which I can't do in this particular slide, you get more detailed data that automatically populates once a user uses Leap Lens. But I just wanted to showcase on the right-hand side that a user also has preset options to help filter data, overlay different data layers that can then help them start to explore Leap outputs, but also prioritize areas based on different data sources, input layers, etc., that they want to look at. So this could be overlaid, for example, with fuel poverty statistics and other socioeconomic data that could help then decision makers explore if they did get, for example, future warm homes funding, where is this best placed across the whole of Leicester and Leicestershire to try and tackle fuel poverty. And on the next slide, I've tried my best to try and showcase as many as the benefits as I can within one slide. But a user can do this then for all different technologies. So I've already mentioned the data is there for rooftop solar across domestic and non-domestic properties, heat network, potential retrofit measures, heat pumps, etc. On the top right of the screen, you can see this for potential ground mount solar sites across the whole of Leicester and Leicestershire. And this provides the outputs of the energy plans by parcels of land that are in the same ownership. And once you click into a parcel of land, you can then get data on the total annual generation that that parcel of land is capable of, its land area, the number of homes it could equivalently power, and its estimated development cost alongside carbon savings. On the bottom right, you can then see how our new approach to scenario modeling comes together to then provide data not based off one scenario, but off multiple scenarios. So in this case with heat networks, this is Leicester, and you can see that the pinks and the purples are where you've got a high scenario frequency that heat networks should be put into that location compared to other technologies and solutions. And in the cases, I think, of the pinks, you're talking about 95% plus of scenarios are saying that is the correct solution to put in that particular location. And a user can zoom in and you can actually click on individual properties. And it also gives you that data and those statistics. So roughly in the middle of your screen at the bottom, I've clicked on one of the buildings that was a non-domestic building. You can access estimated energy consumption for that building, solar PV potential for its rooftop, and also then its percentage in terms of its heat network potential according to the different scenarios. And without trying to overcomplicate things on the left-hand side, I've just quickly shown that a user can go in and explore rooftop solar potential on domestic and non-domestic properties. They can select different properties that they want to focus on and accumulate that data, but they can also then bring in and filter different data layers or different categories and statistics that enable then them to narrow down their potential future projects that they want to explore within a certain area. So this is really useful, particularly for community energy groups that could literally look in their own towns and communities and start prioritizing areas of activity that they could potentially focus on. So on the next slide, I just wanted to cover as well a bit around our governance and collaboration work package. So this showcases that the university's partnership for Leicestershire is taking on a role in bringing together stakeholders and partners to then focus on delivery of Leap Lens moving forward. And the idea is that we want to collaboratively bring together stakeholders to focus on bringing in investment and funding into Leicestershire, but also develop pipelines of activity that we've prioritised as stakeholders, and we're ready to deliver these in the future. And my final slide, I just wanted to quickly cover how we're continuing this post the demonstrator funding. So as I said, Universities Partnership is taking on the collaboration element in terms of bringing stakeholders together. We have public access to Leap Lens through to the end of 2030, and we're also providing guidance and insights on the approach and replicability of how we've visualized energy plans. And the way in which we've done it is based on using GIS software that local authorities typically have access to. And we're producing guidance that is tool agnostic, so it's not specific to any one provider. And if local authorities had the capacity to do so, and their GIS experts had capacity, they could produce something similar without having to rely on consultants. We're also looking to train and engage stakeholders on the use and benefit of using Leap Lens, engaging stakeholders across the public sector, network operators and investors to really build up a pipeline of activity and look at portfolios of projects across the different technologies. And in relation to community energy, we're really wanting to progress some of our pipeline activities across solar schools, some of our grant funded projects, and also opportunities such as shared ownership, energy advice services, etc., with aiming to have an initial share offer of just about £500,000 within that. So we really hope that Leap Lens goes on and has a really big impact moving forward, and that it really helps us to deliver that pipeline of activity across different stakeholders, users of the tool, and partners to ensure that we're delivering at the pace and scale needed, and that we have a really strong evidence base, but also what we've done in Leicestershire can go on and be shared to other local authority areas also. So I think then that brings me to the final slide, which was just a holding slide. And I will just plug that in terms of our community energy work, I believe I'm speaking at the next Lunch and Learn to really focus on what we've done around community energy. So if you didn't already know about the next one, please do join it if you're interested in the community energy angle.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. That's really great. Joel's already shared a link to Greener Future in the chat, so do take a look at that if you haven't already done so. And you've got a question, Michael, in the chat that you might want to. Oh no, sorry, I think it's gone into the Q&A. Anyway, we'll come to that later. But that's great. I love the concept of low regret options modeling. So that's really interesting. And just whilst I have your attention, we have 63 people on this call right now. If you do have questions for Michael or any of our speakers, please do post them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can after we've heard from our three speakers. And a few people, which is wonderful, are promoting their companies and their products. Do share links in the chat so we can find out more and follow up with you afterwards. So looking at Andrew and Lisa in particular, but others, feel free to share details in the chat if you want other people to know about that. So, okay, I'm going to hand over to Hugo now, who I think you're going to share your own screen, aren't you, Hugo? But delighted that you're able to join us and tell us a bit more about some of the work that you've been involved with over in Liverpool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours. And you've got 14 minutes. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Just sharing my screen now. Onto full screen mode. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can both. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. So thanks, Michael, for that. That was extremely interesting on the Leap Lens. And it's a nice corollary to what we're going to be talking about now. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about realizing Net Zero Liverpool's focus on clean energy portfolios and investor matching. So it's a big project. It's a demonstrator as well. The total size of the project is about £3 million. We're covering a lot of areas, and today I'm just going to focus on this, on creating clean energy portfolios and matching them to investors. This is work being done by New Resource Partners, my company, Regent Capital, who's also on this webinar, and Liverpool City Council, of course, who are also on the webinar, in collaboration. I've somewhat slavishly, perhaps, kept to the questions that were sent to me by Roland's team. So it's a very simple presentation that focuses on answering some questions that might be of interest to participants, rather than attempting to give the whole project in the round. That said, I will just start by highlighting the breadth of the project. So we're looking at a series of technical concepts on the bottom of the chart, from domestic retrofit through electric vehicle charging infrastructure, heat networks, grid and grid flexibility particularly, and new build, so avoiding CO2 at the new build stage. Then those technical concepts that's the basis for the solution, for the barriers and the solutions that we then test in 3 exemplar locations, so the 3 little maps: the city centre, Newsham Park and Festival Gardens, where we explore the solutions that have been identified in phase 1 and how they can impact on barriers, from investment through planning, supply chains, grid integration, and capacity and skills. The core deliverables of the project are Climate OS and STEM model. Climate OS is a really interesting piece of software that, if you're not familiar with it, I strongly recommend you look into, made by a Scandinavian company called Climate View, who we've been working with for a couple of years, to get them set up to use to do Liverpool. Essentially what it does is it presents the net zero opportunity across the city and allows both officials and councillors to pull levers and explore the impacts of different measures. The STEM is the social techno-economic model that we've created specifically in this project, which is going to populate the Liverpool page on Climate OS. We're creating an investor prospectus, and that's very closely linked to what I'm talking about today. A housing retrofit database, which goes into a great deal of detail on the housing stock in Liverpool. Obviously, domestic is a major challenge, and from an investment point of view, possibly the hardest challenge. And we've created a set of strategies around engagement, supply chain, improvements to planning, and so on. The outcomes are getting everything in place for delivery. If this doesn't lead to actual built clean energy assets, then it's just another report, and the world doesn't need more of those. A clear governance structure and replication across local authorities. And of course, the macro outcomes are less fuel poverty, less CO2, local growth and jobs, and cleaner air. So I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of the breadth of the project, but we're going to be going into a bit more detail on the investment side of things now. So matching clean energy portfolios to investors. There are some obvious barriers to this. The first is the unknown extent of opportunity and the available returns. So while we are talking about assets in general terms, it's very hard to speak specifically about what that means for investors, what opportunity that represents for them. There's a tremendous diversity in investment model type and in clean energy business models that would be investable through one or other investment model. And what tends to happen is apples and oranges get compared, leading to confusion. There will be specific tastes of investors for specific business models, and it's quite important to get those distinct from one another. The third barrier is simply the distance. People like to say there's a wall of money waiting to invest in clean energy, and that's sort of true. But it's actually quite a long way away from the sort of clean energy assets that we're talking about. Very large numbers of small clean energy assets spread across a city. This represents a lot of uncertainty, a lot of risk, and investors are still at some distance. And when I'm talking about investors, I mean all sorts of different types. Might be an institutional investor, like a big pension fund. Might be a fully funded technology delivery company, much more ready to take risk. Might be private equity. But it's private money I'm particularly talking about. Grants and the National Wealth Fund and all of that is going to help, but the vast majority must come from the private sector. So what approach have we taken? Well, the exemplar locations, as I've already mentioned, provide the first level of specificity, where we can talk about the business models that we're looking at around particular real estate or property assets, the business models for clean energy on real estate assets, with some specificity. Then we're creating a techno-economic model to scale those exemplar level opportunities to the citywide, so that we can present scale as well as clarity to investors. We're engaging with investors. This is critical. It seems so obvious, but it's often not done until late on in the process. The investors will have strong views on what they invest in, and that's usually going to be, have we done it before? And if they've done it before, they're likely to be more comfortable engaging early on. And we're creating an investment prospectus to capture the opportunity that we can present. So Liverpool can sit down with different investors and actually talk in quite specific terms about the opportunities for those investors. One of the key questions that Roland's team asked was, what was innovative? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think is innovative about the approach that we've taken in our work. What did we do differently? Well, as I just said, we engaged before we started polishing. Investors should help the design. They should not cope with it. They need to be able to actually input to it. So that early stage investor engagement, once again, is absolutely critical in listening mode, rather than attempting to present an opportunity, find out what works for them, what floats their boat. Our whole approach is based on bottom-up business models rather than macro plans. So looking at specific properties and then scaling up from there across the city, rather than the macro plan, looking at what's possible along whole areas, across whole areas, and then narrowing down. We start with the bottom up. We look at specific properties, specific portfolios of energy assets on those properties, and what makes them stack up. We created an investment model typology. Now, there isn't time today to go into that, but there will be in due course, to distinguish those differing investor preferences I mentioned before. The thing that looks like a Battenberg cake, it represents the idea that you're matching business models to investment models all the time. And we've created a decision tree process to match those business models to investors. So a kind of flow chart, if you like, which one can go through answering a series of questions. It's essentially an algorithm that then result in a likely investment model that can be pursued in more detail with the investor. How do we avoid duplication and accelerate delivery? Firstly, we've created a dynamic app, or we're in the process of creating a dynamic app with which to engage in discussion with investors. So it's having a static investment prospectus or a static plan is a great start. Having something that you can actually dynamically engage with, tweak, alter, adjust variables in the room, gives an opportunity for the investor to kick the tires. And we're finding that has a lot of impact across the UK. And I'm going to give you a quick outline of what one of those apps looks like. And we want duplication. I understand what Roland's team were getting at when they said, how do we avoid duplication among local authorities? Of course, what we actually want is duplication of approach, because investors like to see stuff that's been done before so they can do it again, as I've already mentioned. It's a common approach across the UK is something that is very desirable. What barriers have we overcome and how was the next question. To be a little silly, data. But there's a serious point in here, the repetition. We have persevered and persevered and persevered to get the data to create robust bottom-up models around clean energy and property. Despite with the best will in the world, working with all sorts of partners, data can be very hard to marshal, just to get access to it, just to get through internal permissions, then to manage it appropriately. So working with one of our key project partners, Scottish Power Energy Networks, for example, we were able to gather crucial data for our grid modeling analysis, but it took a long time because this is very, very new, the work we're doing on flexibility. So the point is, it's very, very hard, again, start early. And that collaboration with Scottish Power Energy Networks and with public real estate in the form of Liverpool City Council and private real estate owners across the city has been absolutely critical for managing that data, for building really robust data sets from which we can then create proxies to scale citywide. So yeah, this app, the dynamic app, this is not the Liverpool app. This is a version we created for another client. The Liverpool app is still in train. But essentially what it does is it looks at a set of properties, any set of properties, and then you can pull levers or adjust variables to explore the impact. So for example, there are variables relating to power price, technology costs, revenue streams like flex revenue, or EV charging infrastructure revenues. And by pulling levers and exploring these different revenue streams, changing pricing, gas prices, electricity prices, changing margins to tenants, one can then see the impact of these various changes on return on investment, critically, payback, and CO2 mitigation. So while this one does not show CO2 mitigation in the on this particular view, it's focused on pricing. So there's the pricing per kilowatt hour paid by the various tenants of this set of properties, an export price that can be adjusted, margin to owner that can be adjusted. Payback is then impacted on by these various changes. And what it enables you to do is look at, in this case, 4 different scenarios, 4 different sets of capex across this set of properties, different amounts of upfront capital deployed, and the revenues that they generate. This enables the investor to get comfortable with the proposition, to kick it around, to see it in 3D, rather than being faced by a series of static numbers. The problem with any static report is, of course, that it's out of date by the time you've really got into discussions. What are the key lessons that we've learned? I've not got much time, so I'm going to be quick. What would we want to share with others completing similar work? Well, start with the council portfolio. I think it's already been said today, that's a great place to start modeling these real estate types and clean energy business models that are predicated on those types of real estate, whether logistics, whether commercial, whether retail, what have you, leisure, and then scale. Scale up from real business models that you've actually built in order to see the impact across the city. What impact has the project created? Well, in a nutshell, and I'd hope Liverpool City Council would agree with what I'm saying here, because I certainly think so. Liverpool now has a well-resourced and aligned team for a long-term strategy, and that's very exciting. And it knows what net zero offers. It's not about cost. Net zero is not a cost. Net zero is an enormous investment opportunity, and being able to present that opportunity to investors in a dynamic and robust way is the way to get private sector, that wave of of private sector money to move towards the opportunity. What would we do differently? We would plan better for slow procurement. You know, everybody on the call here will understand what I mean by the difficulties of procuring team in any public setting. Scale and replication, what are we going to take forward? We're going to take forward the clean energy portfolios we've identified. There's going to be an investor outreach event in February, to which we hope you will come. Could the project be replicated in other places? Yes, easily, through the investment modeling we're doing using the Enquip software, but also through Climate OS to project in a way that is very, very friendly for officials and councillors alike. And what are we doing to scale the work? That's the STEM, that's the socio-techno-economic model, the STEM model, and the Climate OS work. The little picture gives you an indication of how Climate OS works. It's a series of visualizations that enable you to stack CO2 emissions by sector, or indeed investment by sector, and so on. So what's the summary? Just a few little points here, because I know, Roland, you're calling time.
Yep.
Focus on private investment. Grants and National Wealth Fund and all that good stuff can help, but the bulk of the investment must be private. So it needs to be an engagement with the private sector very, very early on in the process to find out what floats their boat. Convene those investors and test sooner. It's really the same point. Better to test ideas than to polish too soon. And prepare the ground. Robustly quantified, worked, real world examples. So stuff that is based on actual consumption data, actual generation data, actual revenues, proven data, wherever possible. And make that opportunity simply as recognizable as possible. A lot of investors won't actually particularly care on the specific choice of assets or the complexities of arrangements between owners of real estate, tenants of real estate, owners of clean energy assets. What they'll really want to know is, does the financial special purpose vehicle that I'm going to contract with look like one that I've contracted before? And are the risk profiles similar? Something very, and that's just an example for the more risk averse institutional investor, but is it something I've done before is a really, really important question to be able to answer. That's it from me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hugo. Really, really interesting. Love the fact that you're framing net zero as an opportunity, not just a cost. Giving examples of business models to scale citywide and the importance of data. Great stuff. There's a question actually for you from Lisa in the chat that you might want to take a look at. And just to address a question further up the chat from Doug about recordings, they are available. We will share the links. If one of my colleagues can share the link in the chat now, that'd be great. Otherwise, we will share them. If you've registered for this webinar, you'll receive that in an email shortly afterwards. If you do have questions for Hugo or for Michael, who spoke previously, then please do post them in the Q&A function. I see we have a few, but we have one more speaker today, so I'll come to the questions after we've heard from our last speaker of this Lunch and Learn, Robbie Barr, to talk about Retrofit One Stop Shop York, otherwise known as Rossi. Robbie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roland, and hopefully I can give a good example of scaling business models in this sector. So yeah, thank you for having me. So today I'm going to talk about powering retrofit through a one-stop shop model, and the model that was developed through Rossi. And I'm also going to talk a bit about finance solutions and data and digital solutions as well. So if we move on to the next slide. So to introduce you to Rossi briefly, this was a project that's obviously an Innovate UK funded project that was established with City of York Council, trying to address their commitment to climate change, and in particular around looking at domestic emissions or emissions from domestic properties, with around 31.8% of York's total net emissions coming from domestic buildings. That was done following a local area energy plan that was actually delivered by Energy Systems Catapult alongside City of York Council. So if we move on to the next slide, Roland. So following the local area energy plan, I thought I'd give you a good idea of what the kind of origins of Rossi were. And initially, it was that problem that was presented. There was then a feasibility study done. So that is looking at what were the barriers to people taking up retrofit domestically. And so we actually interviewed over 600 residents across the city of York. And really, we came up with three key highlighted areas that were major challenges in the uptake of retrofit. The first one is around cost. Cost is the number one barrier to nearly every decision people make in their lives. But in this sector, it is a really big issue. There's not many great, brilliant finance products out there. And there's also this perceived high cost, sometimes fairly and sometimes unfairly, around what the upfront costs of retrofit measures are for homeowners. You've then got the hassle factor. So that is homeowners not understanding what they want. You've then also got the factor of people having, people drilling in walls, roofs being changed, and all of that. But actually, the core hassle factor that came out of it was that people didn't know who to go to, what the products out there were. And then also they had to become basically a project manager and a bit of an energy geek to be able to do it to their home. So we found that that was a major gap. And then the last one was supplier trust. We've all read things in the press about schemes that have gone wrong and mold up the walls. And that has created a lack of supplier trust. But people also don't know who the suppliers are in the industry. They don't know who manufactures heat pumps. They don't know who installs heat pumps. So we've got to make sure that we build trust in those organizations. So if we move on to the next slide, Roland. So this is when Rossi was born. So Rossi is the Innovate UK funded project that was a collaboration of 8 partners. That includes Bright Sparks Agency, which is where I originated from, who developed the digital platform and marketing and the brand. We've then got York Community Energy, who were the advice and assessment organization. We've then got the Combined Authority, who came in and supported the supply chain development. We've got Energy Systems Catapult, who have been mentioned earlier on, who developed a lot of the data modeling and an e-learning platform. We've then got Abundance, who helped us develop an innovative finance solution. And we then had the University of York, who were the evaluation and scale up, with City of York Council sitting above as the project lead. Next slide, please, Roland. Brilliant. So I talk a lot about Rossi, and that's because it's much quicker than saying retrofit one-stop shop York. So when I refer to Rossi, that is what I mean. But when I talk about Your Energy is the business vehicle and the scalable business that has come out of the Rossi project. So Your Energy is initially York's, but is expanding through North Yorkshire and other regions coming soon. It was originally York's dedicated retrofit one-stop shop, making home energy improvements simple, accessible, and affordable. And what we have done in this phase is create a model right from I don't know anything about any of these solutions to I've now got these amazing things installed on my home and I am seeing an improvement. I've got a greener home and a warmer home. So if we move on to the next slide. So to briefly take you through the user journey, the way it kind of works is that we start with by creating awareness. That's through both the web platforms and marketing, building understanding of the solutions. We then provide free impartial advice. So that is retrofit advice that is free to access for all residents and all domestic homeowners. We then move people through to a free in-person home assessment. So we are keeping the barriers low. And we talked about those barriers earlier. And the cost of assessments and the cost of advice is a major barrier to mass uptake in retrofit. We then provide a report which goes through it and we talk the resident through. And a lot of this is about lining up with what the residents' motivations are. Is it a case that they've got a kind of cold home that they're looking to make warmer? Is it a case that they want to increase the value of their property? Or a lot of the time it is, I want to reduce my energy bills. And it's about creating a solution or a number of solutions for the resident that will help improve a number of those different ambitions. We've then also got a customer relationship manager who is also supporting all through the journey. We've then got a supplier marketplace. So when a resident says, yes, I would like a heat pump and a loft top up, we have then built a trusted and accredited supplier marketplace, which I'll go on to more in a minute. And then we've got a finance solution, which again, I will go through more in a minute, but it allows access to finance for everyone and the capability to be able to finance solutions. And then from there, we connect all of those bits together with the resident and then help support them through the back end of the journey. And that's really important. So we've not only informed the resident about solutions, we've provided the advice, we've gone to the home and looked at what's possible. We've then found them a trusted supplier. We've then connected them to finance, and then we've driven them through the back end of the journey so that we see real installation results. Next slide, please, Roland. So I mentioned there the finance offer. Finance, we talked earlier, is the number one barrier to retrofit, and is the number one barrier to many decisions. And when we looked at the market initially, we found that the high street lenders were kind of letting the market down. The high street banks haven't shown a huge appetite to be involved in creating a consumer finance solution and a competitive loan offering. So we then had a look at what other options were available in the market, and we then created a bespoke product with a credit union operating within our area. The key part of this loan offering is that it's an unsecured loan offering. There are a number of offers out there that are secured, but fundamentally, people do not want to secure loans to their property. We need to be able to provide them with the flexibility. Equally, people don't want to add to their mortgage because the mortgage is the biggest thing that they hate in their life. It's their burden for 25 to 40 years. So nobody wants to add to that. So it was about creating an unsecured loan offering, which is knocking a barrier down, and then also ensuring that we have a good competitive interest rate. And so what we've got is the ability to borrow up to £20,000 over 10 years with fully flexible repayment if you want to pay back early. We've also got, the interest actually reduces as the loan balance reduces. There's no setup fees. And critically, we're working with an organization that has a want and a capacity to lend, which we've seen across the board doesn't. There are a number of other options out there, your lendologies, but they've all got other drawbacks involved in the process. If we move to the next slide. I then mentioned our supplier marketplace. So this is addressing the supplier trust issue. So what we really wanted to do was how do we ensure that the residents that we've assessed and go through to solutions get accredited, trustworthy suppliers? And so what we've done is we've created a supplier marketplace of over 27 suppliers operating in the region that we're operating in at the moment, that where we have checked accreditations, checked level of insurance, done financial checks, checked their standards, checked reviews, checked health and safety. And we've basically operated this in a similar way to how public sector procurement works. So that is how our model works, but blended with the simplicity of a Checkatrade / Go Compare style model, where basically once a resident says they're ready for solutions, we will create an individual tender for that property. We fire it into our supplier marketplace, and we get good competitive quotes with methodologies and warranties and guarantees, etc., so that the resident can then choose from one or two different suppliers, and receive multiple quotes for works that they know have come from a trusted and accredited supplier. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly take you through all the digital tools that are in the armory that are involved in this project and your energy going forward. We've got the front end website, we've got the CRM, we've got a procurement system, we've got a virtual demonstrator, we've got a modeling kit for head modeling, and we've got an online skills course as well. So if we just skip through these slides, Roland, if we go to the next one. So this is an example of the front end website. If we keep moving, Roland. We've then got ability to see grants that are available. We've got a finance options generator so people understand the finance options that are available to them. If we then move to the next slide, Roland. We've then got a CRM that sits in the background. This is really the engine room to fully understanding every single homeowner and person that we talk to. We'll then move through to the next slide. We've then got a procurement system that again sits behind this and allows suppliers to give really good quality responses that aren't just, this is the price, do you want it? It's this is the methodology we'll go through, this is when we can do it, these are the potential planning restraints, and then these are some indicative costs. If we move to the next slide, Roland. We've then got a skills course that has been developed by Energy Systems Catapult alongside VEST. We've then got a head modeling tool, which allows residents to see what might be possible for their home and get a bit of kind of tips and advice that's kind of early in the journey to help nurture them into the process. Next slide, please, Roland. We've then got a virtual demonstrator where you can see inside a demo home that was done. So if we skip to the next slide, I think we might see a little bit more from that one. So you can then click on the different solutions and see the benefits of that solution. Again, that was created by Energy Systems Catapult. So if we move through to the next slide. And then I just briefly want to talk about the impact. So in the first kind of 6 to 12 months, we've done over £200,000 worth of works with over 42 projects successfully completed, with another kind of 80 that are sitting in the pipeline already. We've actually now done over 200 home assessments, and we've probably now done over 270 advice calls, and we've had over 600 inquiries. We're now expanding from York to North Yorkshire, but we are having conversations with a number of other local authorities to bring our model to their region, because hopefully we have shown that a retrofit one-stop shop model can be really effective and bring people through a process. If anybody has any questions, please fire them in the Q&A or reach me on hello@yourenergy.co.uk. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Robbie. That was incredibly comprehensive, but I expect nothing less from a one-stop shop. So thank you for sharing. If I can just invite all of our speakers today just to join me on camera just briefly. We need to finish in just a second, but I just want to invite you all just to say any kind of closing comments. What are you going to take away from the session? If you want to very briefly address any of the questions in the Q&A, you can, but we really only have no more than 60 seconds each. Michael, I'm going to start with you. A question I had for you, low regret options, does that mean there's a risk of playing it too safe? How do you balance risk in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I think in terms of low regrets, we're trying to identify on the short-term basis, so i.e. over the next 5 years or so, what should we just get on and deliver? So there's less of a it's less about necessarily risk of delivery, but it's knowing that it's the right thing to do in an area. So it could still be really complex projects like heat networks, for example, but I can use Leap Lens and I can see across the whole of Leicestershire what technology, what solution is best suited to a particular area. And that's really helpful because then we know it's based on the evidence, based on the modeling, it's the right thing to be exploring. And we can actually go away, invest in feasibility studies, and be ready for when funding opportunities come. So it's less about risk of delivery, but it's more about knowing it's the right thing to be exploring rather than the wrong thing to be doing at this moment in time.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And there's a question from Kate in the chat about mismatch of data, but maybe you can respond to that if you can via text. Hugo, I'm going to come to you. There's several questions for you in the chat. I was curious about, you said a key criteria was having done this stuff before. What advice do you have for new projects where there maybe isn't such a precedent? Any reflections from you from today, or any closing comments from you? Oh, I think you're on mute.
No, I don't think so.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah.
It's a good question, but a difficult one to answer quickly. It is a good idea to look at what the investor, this is going to probably seem terribly obvious. It's a good idea to look at what the investor has invested in before and ask questions, why did they like this asset class? And then try and either approach investors who are similar to something you've got already or tailor what you've got to suit the tastes of the investor. The salient point is you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You can't create a perfect thing and then bring it to an investor. You need to find out what the investor's interested in first and then try and tailor towards it. It goes both ways because then the investor will help you develop a project that is investable for a wider pool of its peers, hopefully.
Thank you. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. I've never heard that expression before. I'm going to use that in my next meeting. Robbie, thank you, Hugo. And I know you need to go, Michael, so please drop off. We're going to finish in just a second. We've got a couple of bits of housekeeping, but if I could just come to you, Robbie, I know you were our last speaker, but what are you going to take away from today's session? Any learnings from our other speakers? Any final words of wisdom from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to take away. There's elements that we've seen earlier on around the local area energy plans, and it's really interesting to see how they are being utilised and developed. And then it's really interesting, obviously, to hear from Hugo around investable projects and how you make things investable and how that investor market works. From a kind of innovate project perspective, in particular, a lot of projects, including ours, are trying to move into that investor phase and prepping for investors, whether that is from the kind of public sector or whether that is from the private sector. And that's a phase that we're moving into imminently. So it's really
Mm,
interesting to hear a lot about that. And yeah, I'm sure I'll be in
brilliant.
touch
Great.
with a lot of people following this. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure people will want to follow up with you as well. So I noticed people are asking for contact details and connecting with each other in the chat. We'll do our best to connect people with each other, but including with you, Robbie. So thanks again for speaking today. Okay, I'm just going to move to final housekeeping. I know lots of people need to drop off because we're on the hour, but just so you know, just in case you missed it, I think there was a question earlier about this. There was a session just before Christmas where we had a similar format presentations from Rosendale and Bristol. I think the link was just shared in the chat by Dino, but that will also be in a follow-up email from this webinar. There are two more webinars coming up in February and March, dates and times there, as well as the themes. Please do register and join us for those if you're interested. And that's everything we wanted to say. If you're interested in learning any more, please do get in touch. There's an email address there on the screen. And we have shared, I think, a couple of times now in the chat, more details about the Net Zero Living Programme. So thank you again for joining us today. We're going to sign off there. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.